Hey everyone, so I apologize for not doing this vlog a week ago, uh, but I'm doing it now. And I'm most likely going to do episode 8 right afterwards. So, season 2, episode 7, Reckoning. I just watched it again. I always like to watch these episodes before I talk about them. The scenes that stick out to me really stick out, but there are other things going on that I want to talk about as well. That's why I watch these episodes every time I do a vlog. So let's talk about this episode. So it starts off with Atticus going in to see Quintus. And because of what Atticus had seen with Simon the Zealot putting his weapon down and changing his mind about the assassination attempt after seeing his brother be healed by the pool, Atticus doesn't know what to make of Jesus. And there are these signs all over Capernaum that are... Remember, Quintus did this at the end of season 1 where he said, the teacher known as Jesus of Nazareth is sought for questioning. Well, Atticus knows about Jesus of Nazareth, so he decides to go to Quintus and tell him about him. And when he does, he says, I know where he is. And Quintus is intrigued by this, because he wants to talk to him. He wants to know what's going on. So, that's going on. Then we cut to... Okay, so now that Mary is back in the group, because Simon and Matthew went to go get her, she's back in the group. So Simon and Andrew are talking, and Andrew is starting to get a little nervous. And this I remember, because this actually plays a big part in season 3 coming up, because we're getting towards the end of season 2. But I never, that really stuck out to me when Andrew confronts all of this with this person. And again, I'll get into that when we get into season 3, but this is the start of it. So Andrew is getting very anxious about what's going to happen to Jesus. He doesn't want the Romans questioning him. He doesn't want it because everyone's looking for Jesus. And now that they've been through Syria, word about Jesus is spreading all over Syria, all over all these places that they're going to. And it's gotten to the point where Andrew's getting very worried, because now that John the Baptist has been taken into custody, he's worried that Jesus is going to be taken into custody, and everything that they're planning for is going to be ruined. The big sermon that they're preparing for, the Sermon on the Mount, that is all going to go to waste, and Andrew wants everyone to be quiet about talking about Jesus, just in general. Or he'd rather wait until things just kind of calm down a little bit. Then we'll go back into doing this. But that's not the plan. That's not the plan. And Andrew's very on edge, basically. And it's interesting because him and Simon have this conversation because they're out on the boat gathering more fish. Because the disciples and Jesus, they don't have anything to eat. So Simon and Andrew, because they're fishermen, they're going out into the ocean to catch some fish on the boat. And it's funny because Simon and Andrew and Big James and John had a contest, a rock throwing contest, to see whoever can throw their rock the farthest doesn't get to go fishing, I think. And I think James and John win. So Simon and Andrew got to go fishing. That was a funny scene, by the way. So Simon and Andrew go fishing, and Andrew's freaking out, being anxious, and just not listening. Simon's trying to calm him down, and Andrew's just freaking out. And it's funny, Simon turns to Andrew and he says, Andrew, you're the one that told me about the Messiah. You told me he was the Messiah. Do I need to be the one that reminds you? It's interesting watching it change here, because in season 1, you saw Andrew was very uplifting and very calm, and Simon was the one panicking, and now the tables have turned. So it's interesting watching it play out that way. Because basically it goes to show we're all going to have good times and bad times. And in both of those times, you need to look to Christ. But Andrew doesn't get... I don't think he understands what's going on here. I mean, he does, but I don't think he gets it. And I don't think they do get it. Not yet. In the show. Maybe when we get towards the end of the series, I think. But we'll find out when we get there. So, he's very anxious. And So that's going on. And then Shmuel is walking about trying to find anything on Jesus that he can find, because he's become obsessed with just getting this man for blasphemy. All he sees is a blasphemer. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand either. He doesn't understand either. He's trying to get him for blasphemy because, and he runs into a couple of other members of the Sanhedrin when Jesus healed that man in the synagogue, and that rabbi got mad at him. If he wanted to be healed, God would have done it himself. That's an interesting point. They end up meeting with Shmuel and testifying to what they saw. They said, yeah, this man, he healed this man on Shabbat. He actually worked on Shabbat. That's not, you're not supposed to do that. It's against the rules. It's against the law of what God gave us. He's a blasphemer, and that's all they see. They have no idea what's going on. Or maybe they do and they just don't want to believe it. So that is happening, and then Quinius finds out where Jesus is, and he has the soldiers go and get him. Now, Gaius, who used to guard Matthew's booth, is very interested in going to get Jesus with the other soldiers behind him, and Atticus is with them too. They walk over, they find Jesus. He's there with James and John and a couple of the other disciples, and Mary, his mom. And Simon and Andrew are on the boat fishing, and they see the Romans coming over to Jesus, and Andrew is freaking out. He's mad, he's angry, he's like, I know it, there's no hope for that, nothing, I knew that was going to happen. And Simon's like, Andrew, I need you to take a deep breath, don't worry about this, he said not to worry about it. And they go and get Jesus, and as they detain him, Gaius is looking around, and it's so interesting, because right now, Jesus is surrounded by all of the Roman soldiers. They surround the whole camp. And Jesus is looking around, just taking it all in. And as he's being detained, Gaius is looking around, and Jesus looks at Gaius and he says, Matthew is okay. He's okay. He's back at the camp. In other words, and again, I kind of sense this too. I was right when I said that Gaius looks at Matthew as another son of his. But I think even Gaius is confused. And he's a Roman, but he even walks up to Jesus after he's been detained, and Gaius looks at him and he says, he's okay? And Jesus says, yeah, he's okay. He's back at the camp. We've been going a little hungry for the last few days, but we have some men stocking up on fish out in the sea. And Gaius walks up to Jesus and he says, he's used to eating. He's used to eating certain things. What do you have to offer him? What could you possibly offer him? And Jesus looks at all the Roman soldiers, and he looks at Gaius and he says, can we talk about this another time? So right there in that moment, and again, I didn't pick up on this when I first saw this episode, but right in that moment, you could sense that Jesus is looking at the other Roman soldiers, but he's looking at Gaius, because Gaius, I think, is legit. I think he's going to turn at the end. Like, he's a Roman soldier. We've been introduced to him that way. He doesn't get it, but he's willing to be open because he asked Jesus this question because he legitimately cares about Matthew. And Jesus wants to give him an answer because Gaius cares in his heart about Matthew. So Jesus is willing to answer him, but not at the moment, because all these other soldiers, they ain't going to listen. They're not going to listen. And if he wants a legitimate answer, and Jesus is going to give it to him, now isn't the right time. So I don't know if we're going to get that scene later on down the road, but we'll see. So Jesus gets detained. He goes in for questioning. And before he goes in for questioning, all the disciples meet up at the camp with Mary, including Andrew, and they're all just blaming one another. This is all your fault. You should have done this. This shouldn't have happened. Mary, you never should have left the group. And it's just like nobody is planning the sermon. Jesus told them to keep planning. He told them, I will be back. When he gets detained and they take him away, he says, don't worry, I'll be back. But they don't believe that because they're so threatened by what these Romans can do. And because John the Baptist recently got captured, Andrew thinks, oh no, the same thing's going to happen to Jesus. And then Jesus gets questioned by Quintus, which is a really good scene. Quintus is trying to figure Jesus out, but he's not sure what to make of him because not only he uses a fish metaphor, flesh and bones. They eat, people in the Far East, they eat the fish raw. They eat the flesh, they spit out the bones. Now he looks at that with Jesus and he says, I don't care about your miracles or any of that stuff, but you've actually, you made a zealot have a change of heart. Now that's flesh, that's good, but you're giving me a lot of bones here. You're creating crowds. You're making me look bad. He says, no more bones, Jesus. You're not going to do this anymore. I don't want you doing this. I don't want you creating crowds. And Jesus looks at him and he goes, I cannot promise any of those things. In other words, I'm not going to force the crowds to happen. The people that want to follow me are going to follow me. And it's not their fault that they're creating a crowd. I want everybody to listen to me because I'm here for everybody. Everyone. He doesn't say that, but that's essentially what he means. And so Jesus tells him, he says, I can't promise that. Quintus looks at him and he goes, I can't promise you'll keep breathing. And I'm like, oh boy. And Jesus looks at him and he says, well, I guess we're clear on what we can and cannot promise. And that's such a great line. I love that line. And there's this line I also like as well. I think Quintus threatens Jesus with something, trying to make him do something, seeing that he's going to make him do something. And Jesus replies to him. He goes, I won't make you do anything, but my Father on the other hand. That's a good line. I really like that line. And Quintus laughs it off. He's like, I don't know what that means. And so Quintus decides to let Jesus go, and he leaves. And Jesus comes back to the camp, and everybody's panicking. They're worried. But he says, I told you I would be back. Why weren't you here planning? And all the disciples are looking at each other like, because they were panicking. They didn't know what to do. And Jesus said, this is going to get a lot harder as we go on. What are you going to do when I'm not here? And they really start to look at each other like, you're not going to be here? Because they don't know yet. And they ask him, they say, Rabbi, when you go off astray from us at times, you pray, right? Okay. In good times and bad times, right? Okay. Can you tell us how to do that? How to pray in times like that? And Jesus looks at them and he goes, now you are acting like students. Now you are asking the right questions. Yes. And Jesus looks at all of them and he says, when we pray, we start by acknowledging our Father in heaven and all of his glory works. So we say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And then we want to ask him that we follow his will and let his will be done and not our own. So we ask him, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is. So he teaches him how to pray the Our Father, and I'm like, oh wow, this is really, really good. Yeah, this is cool. And it's in the Gospels, that the Our Father is in the Gospels. But I really liked that scene. I really like how he breaks down the Our Father prayer. He doesn't just say it. He shows them. He tells them what it is and what it means. So that happens. And then, oh yeah, and all the while, during all this, Shmuel, who was one of Nicodemus' students, he's the one that wants to get Jesus for blasphemy and all that. He is looking for the woman. I forget her name. I'd have to remember her name, but he is looking for the Ethiopian woman who met Jesus in season 1 when the leper was healed, and she sent her friend to be healed, the paralyzed man, through the roof of James and John's house. And so she's out there with her friend who was healed, preaching about Jesus. And Andrew hears about this, and Andrew wants her to stop. Because, again, he's worried that, Jesus is going to be killed. This is before Andrew finds out that Jesus wasn't killed, by the way. Not yet. But he's basically telling her, I don't want you to talk about this. And one thing that really caught my eye here was Yusuf, another one of Nicodemus' students, who is a member of the Sanhedrin. He comes in, he's disguised, and he's actually on our side, believe it or not. He's on Jesus' side. He tells them, he says, listen, Shmuel's looking for you. He's going to twist your words. He's going to twist your testimony about Jesus. He wants to get Jesus. I think you should get out of here. You should get out. I'm not going to say anything, but you should leave. And I was like, whoa, does Yusuf believe? This is pretty big. So yeah, there's a lot of twists and turns going on in this episode, but I really, really liked this one a lot. And of course, it ends with Jesus waking up Matthew in the middle of the night, and he says, "Matthew, I don't want to wake the others. I know when I'm preparing for the sermon, I need you to write this down." And he says, I'll get my tablet. I'll get it. He says, is it time? He goes, the time is right now. The time is right now. It's right now. And that's the end. That's the end of the episode. And so we'll see what happens in the season finale.